Good morning, good day, and good evening. I'm as always your host, Brody Robertson, and today we have someone from the Thunderbird project on. Welcome to the show, Ryan Sipes. How you doing?
Yeah, doing really well. How are you?
Not too bad. I'm awake a touch earlier than I normally would be, but I don't know if that's better than the normal time I record, which is often at 1:30 in the morning. So
Yeah.
neither is optimal, but we're here anyways.
Yeah, see, I don't know how old you are, but I made the transition to what I consider to be an old man when I went from staying up late to waking up early. And so it's not so crazy for me. But
Mhm.
this is not abnormal for me because the Thunderbird team is very distributed. In fact, we have a few folks in New Zealand. And so,
Ah.
scheduling across folks in Europe, US, and New Zealand is extraordinarily challenging, but doable.
Your time, what would it like? What time would a meeting normally be, or does it like shift around based on the specific meeting?
It shifts. It shifts. It's accommodating everyone,
Right.
or not. Maybe not everyone. We really never have a meeting where everyone is present, except for very special occasions.
Yep. Yep.
But accommodating all three time zones requires some creativity and folks to be a little flexible and say, okay, yeah, maybe I'll start work later and stay around at my desk later.
Right. Right. Yeah, that sounds like
Yeah.
an absolute disaster. Just getting two time zones to work is hard enough. Just add any more in that. Like that's why I typically don't do three-person podcasts unless I know that like
Yeah.
the people I'm talking to are in a similar enough time zone. It's like, one's in MST, one's in EST. Like, that's easy enough. We can deal with that. Don't throw in, like, GMT in there. I don't know what I'm going to do.
I used to think it was a big weakness that we were so distributed,
Mm-hmm.
but now I see as we've managed to get more organized that it forces us to write things down and
Mm-hmm.
share things with each other versus like just rattling it off in a meeting.
Mm-hmm.
And that's actually helpful because then it's down on paper or in this case in a doc. But then everybody can look at it and refer back to it instead of just something someone said offhand. So it can be a superpower, but it's a difficult thing to navigate.
Yeah, I have absolutely no doubt about that. Now, I'm sure most people watching this like are aware of Thunderbird, but for anyone that isn't, how about we just start with like what is Thunderbird and why would somebody even want to use it in the first place?
Yeah. So how a lot of people would describe Thunderbird is it's probably the not probably, it's for sure the most popular open source email client
Mm-hmm.
on the planet, by measured by the number of users. We have, depending on how you do the math, about 20 million, users, and it's been around for a long, long time. It's been around for 20 years, in various forms, and so it's by no means a new project, and it's built that user base over a long time. But I would add an extra layer that folks probably don't typically think about when it comes to Thunderbird, which is it's more than just an email client
Mm-hmm.
because a lot of times we get compared to Geary and other folks, and those are great projects, but they're not a one-to-one replacement for Thunderbird because Thunderbird has very extensive features around calendaring and around task management and around a number of other areas where you don't typically find in other clients. And
Mm-hmm.
so I would go a step beyond to say it's more like a communication suite or something like that, or a personal information manager.
Mm-hmm.
But for the sake of ease, most people, including us, describe it as primarily an email client.
Right, right. So something like Geary would be more akin to like Outlook, whereas this does that as well, and then 100 other things.
Yeah, yeah, and it does it. It's the thing that I'm pitching. This is my pitch to all the folks listening who aren't using it currently. Like, it not only does them, but it's been around so long and it's had so many domain experts contribute to it that it does things in ways that are like incredible that have like the problem space has been thought through so thoroughly in Thunderbird that like when we look at other clients and we see how they're doing some things, it's like, oh, well, there are going to be cases where that doesn't work right. Whereas in Thunderbird, you've got 20 years of knowledge and expertise going into like, in this scenario, this needs to behave this way. And this, and I think about that all the time, just with like calendaring and just handling different types of email accounts and how robust it is. So sorry, that's my pitch to everybody, but like it really is apple to oranges. And I would say that of the proprietary applications, you know, when I think about what's out there, like Outlook is probably the closest to what we are. And then there are, beyond that, there are very few that I think occupy our same space.
This doing like everything is it's one of the great things about Thunderbird, but in the same vein, it's also one of the things I often hear like criticized about Thunderbird because it does so much. Like, you know, if you're just looking for an email client, it's a great email client. I mainly just use it for that and a bit of calendaring. But I can understand why for people like that, like maybe something else does just that specific focus maybe better or maybe just as good without the rest of the extra stuff that you just don't need to think about.
Yeah. I think that it's a fair point. I will say that one thing that we've really focused on, and if you go to our website, thunderbird.net, we really got into this lately, is we were talking about like what makes Thunderbird unique. And one thing that we kept coming back to is like, I see it all the time in talking to users. There are so many users with radically different Thunderbird experiences because the ability to customize is so extreme that, you know, I swear I've seen things that don't even look like Thunderbird, but they are, you know, that someone has heavily customized for their use case. And what I would argue is like, you don't have to use calendar and you don't even have to make that, like that whole thing. If you don't turn anything on in that area, nothing is happening there. No processes are running around calendar. Nothing is happening. And like, you can cherry pick, you know, what you want your experience to be. And I'm very confident at this point that like, you know, folks should take the Thunderbird, and if they already have a tool that works in one area like calendar, use it for email and stand it up beside your current email client and like give it an honest try, not just an hour, like spend a week with it. And I guarantee that you'll find that there's just far more that you can do and a lot more that you can tailor to your workflow than anything else.
Yeah, I've personally been using Thunderbird, I want to say like 3 or so years, because before that I just did the whole, you know, web client thing, which is what most people do. We'll get into the web client thing in a moment. And I, like, for me at least, I use it in a fairly, I guess, normal way. I don't really do that much customization to it. I have all of my 12 different email accounts listed out in the sidebar. And for me, I guess it's just, unlike the web client thing where you have to like swap, like I'm logged into this one, I'm logged into this one, it's just all in one place. I can go through all my emails like real quickly. And for me, just that by itself is convenient enough. But on the topic of the web client thing, with web clients nowadays being like, you know, such a standard thing, no matter what email provider you're using, pretty much most of the major ones provide some sort of web client. Why does an email client still matter?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And a few years ago, it would have been, not a few years ago, I've been at Thunderbird for a long time now. Like 7 or 8 years ago, this would have been a really challenging question for me. But there's many dimensions to this answer.
Mm-hmm.
One, data sovereignty. I've now heard of folks who have been locked out of Gmail or their email provider over, even if it's just a misunderstanding
Mm-hmm.
or some just issue. Like there's many issues that can pop up, but they get locked out. Okay, they spend months trying to get back in, and during that time, they don't have access to their like digital life, like or someone's like, oh, I need to find this, I need to read this email. Like having the control of your data and having a local copy of your email
Mm-hmm.
is like very useful in that respect. And of course, there are other people who are like, well, I love that I can be on a plane and not connected to internet and drafting emails or just reviewing emails or replying to them. And then when I hit the ground, everything goes and so there's that too. And then I'll take another tack to answer this question, which is what does your email experience look like using these webmail platforms? Of course, there are good ones, but the main ones are bad in a few key ways. One is they're trying to monetize you, and we've
You like
recently
ads
had
in your email client?
yeah, that's exactly it. Yeah, and we've had a lot of people come over who are just like, I don't like that. It doesn't feel good. It feels like it's not, it degrades the email experience. And there are no ads in Thunderbird. As we'll get to, there are a couple of donation appeals every year, but
Mm-hmm.
overall, but that doesn't show up as an email.
Yeah,
That's just,
it's a clear separation.
yeah. And that's the problem actually too, is it, I it's hard because I have a Gmail account,
Mm-hmm.
and I had stopped going to Gmail for a while, even though I try to make sure I'm going just to see what the experience is like. But there was this time period where I didn't log in to the actual webmail
Mm-hmm.
and to check out what it looked like. And when I went back, maybe the ads were there the whole time, but I saw them and I saw them and I was like, and they look like emails.
Yep.
They're at the top. And I thought that was so gross. And
Mm-hmm.
so, and now Outlook's doing that too. And so um, it's really not a great experience. I think it really does make the experience worse. And it's also a little tricky. I know it says ad, but like it it's not clear separation, and I don't love that. And
I don't
so,
know how
well,
you. Sorry, I was gonna say I don't know how you like go through your emails, but when you have like 100 emails there, I don't pay attention to the entire thing. I'm like, okay, who's it from? What's the start of the subject say?
yeah,
And it's probably like some nonsense from some website I signed up to a mailing list for and just didn't realize. Delete, 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 delete. I'm not paying attention to like the entire email line unless I'm already sure that like that's an email I care about.
yeah, and then on that, kind of related to that, I'll make one more case,
Mhm.
which, uh, well, no, I'll make your case again,
Mhm.
which is uh, you're not having to go up and click your little avatar to change accounts if you have multiple accounts. This is something that on desktop is very helpful, and it's just, maybe it's just invisible to me now because I'm so used to having all my, but with the addition to K9 to our family and me plugging in and really trying to make sure all my accounts are in there and everything on mobile, it's just like a game changer. Like I'm using the unified inbox. There are a lot of accounts in there. They're color coded so I can see what message the account is associated with. And it just allows me to really quickly manage
Mhm.
my email versus Gmail, where you're in one account, now click change the user account. And it's just not as fast. And so that makes life simpler and doesn't burn your time so much. Um, but the last thing that I'll say is we I talk about this with the folks who contribute to Thunderbird all the time. Like, what's another thing that separates us, and that's that a lot of my conversations these past 2 years have been around what's actually healthy for a person. And I don't, not so many of those features have made it into Thunderbird yet, but
Mhm.
what we're not trying to manipulate your brain to do a specific thing that benefits our bottom line.
Mhm.
Like there's no dark patterns, there's no stickiness, like let's get them trapped in their inbox or whatever. Like we're strictly trying to provide the best email experience, period. And honestly, I freaked out some folks on the team when I said this. I would like to find ways to help folks spend less time in their inbox,
Mhm.
and know that Thunderbird is the email app that actually helps me not spend, 4 hours a day in my email, which
Mhm.
some folks tell me that they do. And I'm like, that's not good. Like that's half your working day spent on email.
Mhm.
There's actual work you probably should be doing. And so, a victory for me will be finding ways to promote well-being around email and around your inbox and helping you get through it so you can do the things that you actually want to do
Mhm.
with your time.
I definitely want to expand upon that if there's anything that you feel comfortable like saying publicly before it's actually done. But before that, the Gmail situation is actually the good example of switching accounts. Like that's where it's not that inconvenient. I started using Thunderbird. I put Canine Mail and Thunderbird together. Thunderbird when I started going to university because my university they use Outlook and then you might have a job that uses something else, and then I have my Gmail. So you've got
Yeah.
all of these different services. None of the webmails connect to each other. So
Yeah.
you've got to like just jump around. Like, okay, wait, was it on this service? Was it on that service? And it's just a giant nightmare to actually manage that. Then you have something like Thunderbird, and it's just like, whoop, all there. Click
Yep.
the box, it's done.
And that's a good point, and that's the killer thing. Like I think about a family member, and it's so funny because you're so deep in it sometimes
Mm-hmm.
that you forget about the best pitches for it.
Mm-hmm.
Because I remember a family member being like, they had their Yahoo account, they had their
Yeah.
Gmail account, they had their whatever work account, and they were like, and we were talking about Thunderbird, and it wasn't right away. It was like partway through the conversation. I was like, no. Actually, you know what? If you use Thunderbird, you can have all these in one place.
Yep.
And they were like, holy crap. I didn't, like they didn't even consider that they weren't like super tech savvy, but they didn't even consider that there's a product that could
Yeah.
save them that time of app switching and put that information in one place. And what's also cool about that is it's all in Thunderbird and it's all those accounts are searchable, whereas like if they're in these different data, they're in these different places, you can't search across them, but in Thunderbird, you'll actually be able to say like, actually, I don't remember if that came in on that my junk email address or my real email address, but if I search Thunderbird, I'll find it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that's a killer feature too. It's a good. I'm glad you're here, Brody.
Yeah, a lot of people like when you are very into whether it be Linux, whether it be Thunderbird, whether it be any of these like really techie things, it's easy to forget the things that appeal to the regular person because you've been using it a long time. You understand like the ins and outs of this system and understand like, oh, it's great to have my calendar directly load events that I send from an email. Like that's great. But to someone who's just using a web client, like just the fact that all the stuff is together is such a big appeal. Like that by itself should be the main focus.
Yep, yep, agreed. And where we call that out to it in like on the website,
Mm-hmm.
which we have a new website, is beautiful. But like freedom from chaos, and the like subtitles waste less time finding browser tabs, which is like the whole thing. Like
Mm-hmm.
we're gonna consolidate this and we're gonna make it awesome.
Yeah.
And so you're exactly right. And um, not to jump ahead, but a lot of that was what drove this big rewrite that we did, which
Mm-hmm.
was like we have all these really cool features, but how do we make sure that everybody actually can discover them and use them and understands them? And so anyway, we've been thinking a lot about that.
Mhm.
Good point.
So, what were you going to say before about like spending less time in your emails? But if there's nothing you want to say because you've not actually got it done yet, we can skip over this topic. But
We've teased it a number of places. One thing that I would love to see is I want on a per account level
Mhm.
to on both my phone and my computer
Mhm.
to selectively put accounts into sleep or make them
Okay.
go away at certain time periods or for certain time periods. So like, you know, we call it vacation mode, or we called it like weekend mode, where you're done with work, you still are like with K9, it's still going to be in your pocket, but you're like, I don't really need to know if somebody sends a message at work at this point.
Right.
I
Right.
don't want that to disrupt my evening. So instead of having to turn off your notifications for that entire app, we're going to be more granular and allow people to say this account gets snoozed. If I go to it on purpose in the app,
Mhm.
obviously show me everything, but otherwise, don't like let that be invisible for this time period. Or when you're on vacation, that's the same thing applies. And that's one example of a feature that I think will enable people to be, you know, better with their attention and their time and being present. Because I think email, as much as I make an email application and I love email, I also think it's an enormous distraction from when you're trying to do other things.
Mhm. Yeah, I'm bad at replying to my emails, so for me, it's not.
Yeah.
But I let other things take up my time that shouldn't be, like social media. So I'm not much better. It's just I replaced one thing
Yeah.
with another thing. Right now you can obviously like, delete the entire email, but that's not like the entire account from like Thunderbird. Like that's not great because then you have to like re-add it.
Yeah.
And can you manually disable it without like fully deleting it?
There are a number of ways to accomplish this, but none of them are
Right.
like
There's no
simple and
automatic way to
easy.
do it. But it's like, hey,
Yeah.
I want to snooze this between, say, you have a job where you don't have to answer emails like out of work. Like you're not an
Yeah.
important person at the position. It's like after 5 p.m., don't talk to me. It's like okay, you can snooze it from, 5:30 or whatever to whatever time you start the next day.
Yeah.
That would be all.
Yeah.
Yeah, that
That's
would be really
exactly it.
cool.
Yeah. And there have been some other ideas where, that's the one that I think is most likely to make it
Mm-hmm.
in a reasonable time frame that folks will see soon enough. But I think that the other ones are like still ideating. It's a question of like, is the feature that does this, is it worth the time? Is it actually going to have that much of an impact? I think a feature like that would.
Mm-hmm.
The other ones, it's hard because you have to know people don't really use email the same way. Like a lot of people have a lot of different strategies for how they manage their inbox.
Mm-hmm.
And so what you try to do is you try to figure out, well, what are the workflows we can provide that hit the most amount of people? And that's challenging. So there are some other ideas, but none that I think are like as good as that one at this point. But I wouldn't be surprised if we have, some real like 3 to 5 really marquee, like good well-being. I call them well-being features. It annoys the Thunderbird community that I call them that because they have other names for them. But for me, it they're well-being features. They're features that allow you to put um, guardrails around how much of a distraction email is in your life.
Hmm. No, I think that's. Wait, one thing. Wait, okay, I don't know if you can do this already, but obviously, when you get an email, you get a notification if the client's open. Can you set it up right now where you only get notifications from certain addresses that come in?
there are ways to do it, but they're not. Once again, this is like where we can do a lot of good work, and that's a good feature. That's a good feature, VIP type feature.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, which is there are ways to do it, but they can be improved so that everybody knows
Right.
and can discover those easily. And I think that's been the problem with Thunderbird, and probably the thing that was the hardest when I came on is talking to folks and they're like, I wish I could do this, or the more common was I left Thunderbird because I couldn't do this. And me knowing like you can do that, but that it's like in a menu
Yeah. Yeah.
and you have to poke around a while to figure out how to do it. And that really started to change. That really started to tell me that we had to like change the UX in order to make it so that people could see the power of Thunderbird and make use of this what is a power tool
Mm-hmm.
without having to like get through a wall of text
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
figure out how to do it.
I guess that's one of the problems you have with something having so many features over so many years. Like, there's going to be parts of the code base that were written, 10 plus years ago that still
Yeah.
work just fine today, but the UX they were designed with then is not the way that you would go about it now.
And going back through the history of Thunderbird, Thunderbird itself has gone through some crazy times because it was spun out in 2015
Mhm.
and to the community. And the community is why it's alive. But during that time, there wasn't anybody working on it full time for a while.
Mhm.
And so the barrier to entry for making a patch that gets in was, did you make the patch?
Right.
Does it work? Okay, put it in. And I'm sure that your audience, given that they are familiar with open source projects, they had all these people scratching their own itch, but they're just like, they're engineers, they're like, just put the button there, it's fine. Like, and like the problem is, it just got crazy, and a lot of our work, even though I get yelled at on the internet for it, is saying like, this is a great feature, but where it is, it's either one of two ways. It's either not prominent enough because it's a feature that people need to be able to discover,
Mhm.
or it's too prominent for having only 1,000 people out of the 20 million who actually use it.
Right.
And so, that's a real hard thing. And when you change it, you get those 1,000 people yelling at you like, why isn't this like right in the main area of the app? And it's like, well, it's because nobody uses it except for you. So we put it in the settings because we still think it's important, but it's not important enough to warrant that screen space that it took up before. And yeah, and look at that over 20 years of all these different stages Thunderbird went to, and we've got a lot of not just technical debt, but I guess just UX debt and other things. There's so many dimensions that exists in, and that's probably has been our biggest challenge too. Is coming into the project after 20 years and after a few years of not really having anybody who is working on it full time, and then having a lot of cleanup to do.
So when did you get involved with the project?
So I was around in some ways, but not in a prominent way. When I was at System 76 in 2016, I think I joined System 76 in 2015. But I was around, and I wasn't really contributing. I was just kind of sharing thoughts with folks because when I was at System 76, we would get a deployment of a bunch of System 76 computers at like a university. So their entire engineering computer lab might be like System 76 computers running Ubuntu. And I kept getting this question from all these groups saying, what email client should we be using on these machines? Because like when we deploy Windows, the Outlook is what we encourage people to use. But in this engineering department of this company, Outlook isn't an option. So what should we use? Evolution? Should we use Thunderbird? Should we use, what's the best thing? And it really bothered me because I was looking at them and I was like, there were problems with each of the solutions, really clear problems. And so I actually had a hard time deciding what to recommend to folks. And then I saw in 2017 a job come up for community manager at Thunderbird. And I was like, yeah, that's a way for me to, it was only contract like part-time. I was like, I'll just spend my after hours, after work at System 76, just helping them get their stuff together. And obviously that changed over time. I'm managing director of like the subsidiary that Thunderbird sits in now. And so my trajectory has been quite crazy, but that was in 2017 that I joined. And I was pretty clear when I joined. I remember like the interview process, which was all community members, because that's who was running the project. And they asked, like, what would I kind of like, what was my feedback or what would I change if I came in? And I just kind of went down the list of like things that I had gotten from my time at System 76. Like there was like these things prevent people from, deploying it in these different places. And they agreed. And, and that started that out. But then I don't think people realize, in saying that, I don't think people realize when I came on just how close Thunderbird was to extinction. Like it was in really, really bad shape. We couldn't consistently even get the product to build, and we didn't have enough people actively working on it to prevent breakages because we're downstream from Firefox. We share a lot of the same code. And the Firefox folks, which it isn't their fault, they shouldn't have to worry about breaking Thunderbird. And that's part of the reason Thunderbird got spun out to begin with, is they were having to make all these concessions that were slowing down the improvement of Firefox because they didn't want to break Thunderbird. And eventually they were like Firefox needs to be, that's our product that's used by hundreds of millions of people. Like we need to make sure that we can keep up with Chrome and the other browsers. And so they made a good decision, but and Thunderbird just was never in a position to take care of itself, to keep up with those changes, let alone contribute back useful things. Like if you're not even able to keep up with changes, you're not benefiting upstream, which is a good thing for a project to do. And so anyway, there were a lot of problems there. But what we talk about donations, and I know you did the video and everything, and what my contention was, I kept thinking all the time, like, because I'd been at System 76, but before that I had started a startup called Mycroft, which was a open source like Amazon Alexa, Amazon Echo type thing.
Okay.
And I remember thinking like 20 million users.
That's a lot of people.
Yeah, I would have like, maybe this is not true, but the thing I would say at the time is I would have killed for 20 million users, on my product before. But what I kept thinking is these users don't know that Thunderbird is in this bad shape. And if it disappears, it's going to cause a lot of people a lot of pain. And, there was actually an argument at the time because I kept kind of saying like, hey, we need to let our users know that what's happening. And we also need to like tell them that we need their support so that we can hire some engineers to help us keep up with just the changes that are
Mhm.
happening.
What year would this
And
be in?
what's that?
What year would this be in?
This would have been 2018. It
Okay.
started
Okay.
probably in 2018. The thought I had the thought at the beginning, but as I learned more about how it all worked,
Mhm.
I began to kind of think like, okay, well, what are we going to do? And what was funny is, and this is something that I know you'll want to talk about, is so many of the open source developers treated this idea of asking our users to support us with money as like the worst idea anyone has ever raised. And I understand that because my background is open source more than anything else. Like been in these communities since I was like 14 and like so I understand where they're coming from, but at the same time, like if the community of folks who are volunteering can't actually maintain the software alone, then you need to like figure out a way to maintain it because
Yep.
like I don't think anybody wanted to see it go extinct, but they thought it was kind of um, maybe tacky or something to ask the users for money. I
Yeah.
don't know if there's a better word for that, but they just felt
Mm,
uncomfortable asking for money.
sure. Sure.
And so that's what we ultimately did.
Yeah.
We managed to get on the same page, and I remember the first couple of appeals were like very small, very like,
Yeah. What I only saw it when like the web page popped up with the UI update. Like, what were the early
yep.
ones?
Well, we made it more prominent on the start page, which is the thing that shows up before you actually like choose an email,
Mhm.
and and that helped. And then when we updated, I started including a donation link there on the update page, and it was small too, but it enough people clicked it that it made a pretty big difference. And so we're talking about you know a few $100,000 to then okay, we had our first like well, I don't remember what it was, $1.2 million year,
Mhm.
and that sounds like a lot of money, and I love that the community. I love that everybody's like, man, the first when that happened, like, and I was the treasurer at the time on like Thunderbird Council too, so I produced the reports for the donations and everything, and I shared that out with the community, and they were like Thunderbird's loaded, and I was like, well, if you start counting up where that money goes, because it's not just like you have $1 million now you can hire 8 to 10 engineers or however many it is. Distributing Thunderbird costs money. And the infrastructure to do that is pretty intense. And there's all these just costs around distributing this much software that is just pretty big in and of itself.
Well, just the fact that
And
you have like seven, if you had 700,000 and you're like a some random terminal app like that, yeah, you would be loaded. But you have 20 million users. Like
yeah,
that by itself is expensive.
yeah, and there's like bug reports. Like we still get slammed for not keeping up with bug reports.
Mhm.
20 million users produces a ton of bug reports, and we have folks who comb through them individually, and then we have systems that we build and constantly update to try and help us triage them. And like
Mhm.
that alone is like, to your point, is an expensive activity
Yeah, yeah.
because you want to catch the stuff that's like bad, like Thunderbird deleted an email that I didn't delete, or things like that. But combing through all of the reports to get to that is a gargantuan task. And but it worked, and it allowed me to continue to pitch ideas to everyone, like, can we do this, can we do that? And the golden place I wanted to get was like, let's show it in the
Mhm.
application to everyone.
Yeah.
And no one wanted to do that, like do a full page thing, and I understand that, but I thought, okay, but if we do that once a year, I mean, Wikipedia, you know a couple times a year takes over before you can even scroll to the content of the article, you get this big appeal from, Mr. Wales, and it says, you need your help.
Are they
And
on right now? I feel like they are. Let me have a look.
yeah, they are.
Yeah. Okay.
But it's like, but I never felt angry about that, and that's what I was trying to tell folks is like, most of the time, if you see these appeals, people don't get angry. They just glance at it for a couple seconds and then move on, or they donate. Like those are the two things. And so ultimately, fortunately, folks agreed, and because you in this setting where the community has been running the project for multiple years, you don't do anything by there's no BDFL. I know the internet thinks that there is, but there really isn't. And so you kind of have to bring everybody along and convince them and have these conversations.
Mm-hmm.
And they're good conversations to have, because it could be terrible. Like, you could really exhaust people by like doing all these terrible pop-ups and things that annoy the hell out of people.
Mm-hmm.
And we didn't want to do that, obviously, and that was a few years on. That was in 2021, I think. Right? No. Well, 2021 we did a more aggressive update appeal.
Mm-hmm.
So we made it larger here's the update. This is what you get. By the way, like, donate.
Mm-hmm.
And then last year, 2022, we did completely distinct. So we did the update one with the bigger, it's like, here's your update. By the way, donate to support us. And then at the end of the year, we did, hey, Thunderbird needs you to stay alive and to provide a decent experience. And that was where we saw the big jump from like 2.7 million to 6 million.
Yeah.
And that was good. I mean, that was a good thing that we did, and to say that it has fixed a ton of problems in Thunderbird land would be a massive understatement.
So back in 2017, where it says 736,000, what did that mean for Thunderbird? Like, what sort of state was it in when it had that sort of funding? And then what sort of state is it in now, where you have a lot more to work with?
Yeah. So when I came on, that was at 700 and some thousand.
Mm-hmm.
There were a couple places. The start page had a little appeal,
mm-hmm.
and then there was a donate on the website, but we didn't ask like upfront. You just had to click the button and donate. And thank God people did it.
And like, how far did that money really stretch with a project like Thunderbird?
So we had 3 people.
Mm-hmm.
I was part-time, so 2.5, I guess, and then paying for infrastructure, and that ate a lot of the money.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that next year, that bump up, like, that allowed us to add a couple more engineers, which started to help us. Like, we got to the point where at least we're not broken all the time.
Right.
But every year that you see that go up is like a few more engineers, a few, less breakages that are holding back fixing bugs and rolling out features. But mostly it was that first category. It's like, if we're not broken, we can fix bugs.
Mm-hmm.
And that was for multiple years. And it wasn't really until the year before Supernova,
mm-hmm.
102, that I felt like we finally got to roll out some improvements to the actual way that Thunderbird works.
Mm-hmm.
So you're talking 4 years until we actually got to a place where we could look a little bit around and say, well, what can we fix? What are the things that would improve our users' lives beyond just like real true bugs that shouldn't be happening at all?
And I'm sure you've probably heard someone say, "Oh, if you have 700,000, think about all of the engineers you could hire with that, and obviously paying for the infrastructure as well. Like, look, you could hire way more people than that. Like, just run it on red, just as close to the line as possible." But I imagine the concern there would be, is the funding going to be consistent? Like, are we going to have enough the following year, or do we have to just fire a bunch of people? Like, can we actually do this?
People don't remember. I have gotten that before. People don't remember that you're talking about people's employments and their livelihoods, and you have a responsibility when you start hiring people, or even contracting, to at least provide some level of stability. Not just for them, actually, for the project too, because you can't make plans if you don't have some stability. So you are right. We always tried to be sustainable,
Mm-hmm.
and to not count on us being as successful the following year as we were that year. Mm-hmm. And now everyone will tell you who has worked with me on Thunderbird that I'm incredibly optimistic. And I will gloat and say that I called every single within a very small margin of like 2%, mm-hmm. every single year, our performance. And so on revenue. And so that was crazy optimism. And I admit that. Like, mm-hmm. lots of people told me, you're crazy, you can give it a try, but I don't think that's going to work. But what I always plan for in the back of my head is like, in actually budgeting it out, what happens if that doesn't materialize?
Right.
What do I have planned already for if we do half that we did last year? Mm-hmm. Because I thought there's always a chance that we've saturated the people who want to donate, and that they're not going to donate next year because they're like, I already gave, they're fine, everything's fine, like I don't need to give this year. Or I remember doing the budgeting when COVID was just in China, mm-hmm. and I remember there were some headlines like, maybe it will get out, maybe that this will be really bad. And I remember thinking when I was budgeting that year, like, okay, what if that kicks off some kind of really bad recession where folks they're like, I've got enough problems, I'm not going to donate to Thunderbird.
Imagine
like that. That's the last thing on my mind.
Imagine that happening.
But and it says in the budget that year, it says something like, in the document itself, like, that I submitted to the council, mm-hmm. the Thunderbird Council is the community governing body.
Yep.
Something along the lines of, this accounts for, the potential of a global recession from, I don't remember how I put it in there, mm-hmm. but, and what I was wrong in that we did have the pandemic, but people were stuck in their house in front of their computer, which actually had, I think, the opposite effect, mm-hmm. where people were like staring at Thunderbird for a lot of time every day, and they're like, they see these appeals or whatever, and they're like, yeah, okay, like, sure, like, I'm still working. Not everybody, but a lot of folks who were using Thunderbird for work, mm-hmm. where they're working, they're like, I'm not spending my money on going out and stuff. I can give Thunderbird $5, mm-hmm. And that really helped. But that's a long-winded way of acknowledging that you're right. We always planned, and we always had runway for 1 year, and we still do. Mm-hmm. For 1 year, if donations completely stop, we have 1 year where if zero was coming in, we would have the runway to figure that out, mm-hmm. and to adjust course.
So, okay, we can see what, like, the actual number is. A lot of people like to argue with what's actually happening based on their personal experience. Like, when I did my video on the Thunderbird funding, I had a bunch of people saying, no, I hate this. Why would anyone want this to be in another application? Because I suggested it maybe like KDE could do something similar, or GNOME could do something
Yeah.
similar. And I obviously had people who were like, no, how that would be terrible. What that no. But like, what community reaction did you actually see from this funding outside of the obvious it worked, you can see by the numbers?
It's challenging because there's a lot of like, great, love it. I'm glad Thunderbird is going to continue to exist and improve as a tool. There is not that much, but some people who are like, don't, like, spend the money this way, don't spend it that way.
Right.
And but fortunately, like, if you actually look at the breakdown, which is in the financial report, 80% of it is just essentially, I guess that we marked it as personnel. Okay, but like 90% of that is engineers who are actively contributing code to the project. So like, most of the money is going towards, what people want. And then outside of that, if you look at the breakdown, like, between like general and administrative, which is 6%, and professional services, which is 5%, and IT or computer and tech, which is 2%.
What is computer and tech in this context?
So computer and tech is actual equipment for folks to work on.
Right. Okay.
As well as some tooling, some tool chain like stuff that folks need in order to develop software, or that we think we need.
And then would infrastructure be like under general administrative?
It's kind of split up depending on what kind of, because professional services encompasses like agreements that we have with like Mozilla Corporation, who has a lot of infrastructure that instead of us building it ourselves, we're like, we just want to use what you have because we are building on the same technology. But of course, it costs them time and money to maintain that and keep it running. And so we pay for things like that. And then general administrative also includes that, which includes other tools and things. And frankly, there is something, and it truly doesn't represent that much of the spend. But when you get to a point where you have, we're now up to 30 people, 32 people, just the cost of having that many people begins to be a significant thing.
Yeah.
And I don't want to say managing, but just like the cost of just operating,
like just doing payroll and stuff like that.
Exactly. Yeah. And so those are things that, sometimes you get pushback from folks in the community, like, why are you spending, 6% on this stuff? And it's like, well, we spend the least amount that we can in that area and still be able to, pay people and keep them contributing code.
I'm sure the most annoying part is the 5.8% on donation processing fees.
Yeah, we have a really good deal on that. We've spent a lot of time trying to bring that low, but also like not just bring it low, but also provide a good experience, because you can provide a bad donation experience, which when I started we had, which was, I want to donate. Okay, I'm going to do a recurring donation. Okay, great. I want to cancel that recurring donation after a few months. Okay, email me and I'll turn it off.
I see.
And like, okay. And so you eventually have to say like, oh, that's not ideal. Like, you want folks to be able to do things without somebody actually in the background, like pulling levers. And so, while you can go cheaper, but you pay a price in just convenience and man time and all of that stuff. So
right.
But I will say, going down that rabbit hole, like, that is not the majority of feedback. That is very rare feedback that we get of people hopping in there. And we're really, with this report, like, try to be as transparent as we can, and also respect people's time. Like I have encouraged people, if they want to know more, they can ping me. I'm in all the community channels, like, and I will explain it to them. If they have a good question, but like we there's no like back room. Like we put everything in the report,
Mm-hmm.
and we try to make sure folks know exactly where their money is going, because we think we're using the money so responsibly that when they see that, they'll be like, okay,
Mm-hmm.
that's actually that's what I want it going towards.
Right.
So
There's always going to be people to complain no matter what you do, though. Like how do you find yourself filtering out the people who are just complaining for the sake of complaining, and the people who have like actual legitimate concerns?
I mean, you can pick that up pretty quickly. One thing that I do that I'm proud of, but is not necessarily good for my mental health, is even if somebody comes out and they yell, or they're kind of like saying things in a really confrontational way,
Mm-hmm.
I try to like set that aside and look like, are you legit? Do you legitimately have like a concern or a question that I can try to
I
address?
try to ask them to
And
clarify what they're saying.
yeah, and if the answer is yes, I will do it.
Mm-hmm.
I will try to the best of my ability to answer that. When I have a lot of folks who, not a lot, I shouldn't say a lot. It feels like a lot because any one bad interaction is like bigger in your mind.
Right.
But I have some folks who come back and they tell me what we're doing, and that is the type of thing where I'm like, I don't know what to tell you. Like I'm I'm trying to engage with you, but if you're just going to tell me what we're doing, which usually isn't correct, like they're like, oh, well, it's a lot of it comes from like a dislike of Mozilla,
Mm-hmm.
and they're like, the one that makes me the most upset is when folks are like, why do you need donations? You have all this like Google ad or Google search money. I'm like, no, like literally Thunderbird is in a different company, and it's still owned by Mozilla, but there has been no investment from Mozilla in Thunderbird since 2015.
Mm-hmm.
And so we are completely donation funded. And if donations go away, Thunderbird goes away. Like there's no and that's okay. Like we as a community and as a project believe that we should be self-sustaining. But to, what frustrates me is when folks tell me like, no, you have like Google ad money, like, and I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
listen, like I don't know what to tell you. Like and that's there. If there are frustrations, those are it, where folks are telling a story to themselves
Mm-hmm.
that isn't true, but it's the internet, so you can only go so far
Yeah.
in trying to convince someone of how things are.
Yeah, if you explain to someone how it is and they still don't believe you, like at that point, you cannot reason someone out of a position that they didn't reason themselves into.
Yeah, and we have to release. If you go to the Mozilla website, we have to release, because we're owned by a nonprofit. The
Mm-hmm.
nonprofit must release their tax returns. They own MZLA, which is where Thunderbird is, so they release MZLA's information too.
Mm-hmm.
So you can see a lot there, and you can see the delineation and like what we get, what you can see a lot of information about like what our business looks like.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, you could, if they, for instance, like were giving us Google ad or Google search money, you would see that in there, but you don't. You see it matches our revenue, that we get from donations,
Mm-hmm.
and that's it. That's
Yeah.
not a very interesting document. Um, but you know, and the other piece is some folks are really skeptical of Mozilla, period.
Mhm.
Um, and I can't say that that's I can't say that what do I want to say here? It's okay. Like they can have that opinion that they just for whatever reason have decided that they don't like Mozilla as an entity. But I think for the open source community, it's really a sad thing because the people who make up Mozilla, in my experience, talking to all of these folks, and I talk to a lot of folks in the foundation and the corporation,
Mhm.
they have the same values that a lot of open source members do around privacy, open source software, and and the freedom to use software the way you want and not be the product.
Mhm.
And I have yet to meet anyone at Mozilla who doesn't share those values. And I feel like the community is harder on Mozilla than they are on the actual bad companies that do the bad things. And maybe that's because Mozilla holds itself to a higher standard, and when they mess up, it's like like hypocrisy. But any organization or set of organizations, in the case of Mozilla, that are as big as they are going to mess up occasionally.
Mhm.
And like, but I feel the other folks who frustrate me are folks who say like Mozilla's bad, period. And it's like, and you know, and then they're like, I don't use Firefox, I use WaterFox. And it's like you realize like 99% of what you're using, 99.8% of what you're using is, you know, funded and developed in Mozilla
I
and like
I do love when people argue like, "Oh, I don't use Firefox. I use an outdated version." Like, okay, yeah, you can go in like half. Like, this is the problem with a lot of the browser forks. A lot of them are browsers. I'm sure you've spoken to people that work on Firefox. A browser is very difficult to maintain, and when it's like
yeah,
three dudes who are just volunteers who are like forking off of a project, like even just doing that, like that is going to be a massive nightmare to maintain. And basically all of them, I don't think there is a big Firefox fork that's actually successful. There are a couple of
yeah,
Chromium ones, but on the Firefox side, yeah, I think they're all basically just like volunteers, and maybe a couple people have like reasonable donations, but nothing's
yeah.
like actually keeping up well with the project.
And and what's crazy is like the the Firefox folks, the engineers, who are working on Firefox, they are like open source, like true believers.
Mhm.
And so a lot of times they're actually like, okay, we've got this fork, something's wrong with it. Like, how can we like let this person know or like fix it upstream and like get that patched down to them?
Mhm.
They care about those forks, even though like some forks in the
Mhm.
world of any project are kind of like you know upstream. They're kind of like, oh, we do it better than upstream, we don't like upstream.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
it's sad because I have a couple of friends, well, one friend in particular who is well known on the internet, and in the open source community, who really has it out for Mozilla. And I've had a number of conversations with him saying like, what you think what you think is happening within Mozilla, it's like the complete opposite when you're
Mhm.
actually sitting in the rooms and you're listening to folks. Like what they're talking about first and foremost are like, how do we how do we produce something in line with our values?
Mhm.
And any other consideration, money, whatever, is a distant second.
Mhm.
And it is sad whenever you see folks who are criticizing the organization who are in this community, who when you act if they actually met the people who are working on it, they would not do that. They would
Mhm.
be like, oh, this is a really good person who you know is trying to do like the right thing.
I can't
um,
speak for corporate, but from the engineers that I've seen out there, just in the FOSS world, just like with Red Hat, the engineers, they're all great people. Like, they're all doing great work. You might have issues with the way the company is run, specific things that corporate is doing, but people like you need to separate the people who are doing the groundwork from the company that you may have issues with.
Yeah. But I've spoken now to every member of Mozilla leadership, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And they all say, if you ask them like, how did you end up here? It's all something like, well, in my career, I worked at Google, I worked at Microsoft, I worked at Twitter, I worked at whatever, and the list goes on and on. Depending on how old they are too, it's a different list of companies. But like,
Mm-hmm.
and they're like, I felt like I was compromising my values in some way when I worked there, and I wanted to come to a place where I could bring my talent, but in support of the in support of values that I thought were good and I agreed with, and and usually, in fact, almost everyone I know in leadership has a background in open source, in activism around like digital rights to privacy and things like that, and they are giving up opportunities at places where they could make a heck of a lot more money to try and do good. And I think that some of the criticism that I have seen on the internet is just kind of unfounded, because like there's no one in it. There is no one, period, that I have met at Mozilla who is there for money. There are just the amount of talent you need to work on the products at Mozilla and their competitors who you're competing against. Like, if you're good enough to work on a browser that's trying to keep up with Chrome and Edge and Safari, doing a stack that is completely Mozilla, like, because Gecko, even the rendering engine is also completely in-house. It's the only independent one left on the planet. Like, to do that is like so hard that if you're capable of doing that, you can go somewhere else and make more money. So anyway, I'll get off that soapbox, but the folks who are working on Thunderbird, who are working on Firefox, who are working on the different products that Mozilla creates, are doing it because they love open source, or they're a big proponent of privacy, of digital, like data sovereignty, all these different things that Mozilla stands for. So end of rant.
So one thing we didn't really touch on earlier is, what does the relationship between Thunderbird and Mozilla actually look like at this point?
Well, so Thunderbird is a project,
right?
And then you have to, and that is community run. There is a elected council who have what we call module ownership over the whole project. And they appoint module owners under them who manage different parts of Thunderbird, who are kind of the leader in each of those areas. So one would be like mail, another one would be calendar, et cetera, et cetera. Those aren't always, and in fact, right now, I don't think most of them are employees of MZLA, who is which is just the legal home for hiring people who work on Thunderbird. Now, our relationship back to the foundation is that MZLA is obviously owned by the foundation as a subsidiary. They help us solve problems that, frankly, even for a team our size, we're still kind of small in that we encounter problems sometimes. For instance, like a company in China just like disputed our trademark.
Oh, that's fun.
In China. Okay, so like we're mostly engineers in MZLA, so we don't have the actual ability to like sort that problem out. And so, the foundation and their expertise helps us sort that out.
Mm-hmm.
And they do a number of things for us like that. And they own the trademark for Thunderbird, and they own the trademark for Firefox. And then what else should I say? The Mozilla Corporation, who makes Firefox, is we collaborate on the things that we share, which we share quite a bit of things. And they're really helpful for solving problems at scale that are difficult for us to solve, because they're operating at you know, depending on what we're talking about, a 10 to 100x scale. So when we're successful and we're like, oh my gosh, we're successful and we're encountering this new problem, they're like, oh, it's okay. Like, we know we've dealt with this problem before. We know how to solve it. So I guess that's like the way I would think about all these things. And now we're at a point where we fix problems in Thunderbird that also fix problems in Firefox. And of course, they fix problems for us too. Sometimes they create problems because we're downstream for them, but like, that's not really their fault. They're building a product, and then the last thing I'll say, and we can talk a little bit about Supernova because it's relevant.
Yes.
Is we have done a lot of work to decouple from the breakages. Because a browser is not it's not an email client.
Yeah.
And we were reusing a lot of things from the browser that, frankly, we should have built ourselves. And so stuff was breaking that was like, well, really, if we stopped using the browser component for that and we just made a component that's for email or calendar or insert, feature here, it wouldn't break because it would be purpose built for what we're doing. And so, like I said, it's not their fault. It's just a matter of being downstream from somebody.
So, I guess Supernova then. But one thing before Supernova, there actually was a period where I was considering not using Thunderbird. Because before the update came out, I had this weird bug where if I deleted, I think, like 5 or 6 emails at once, it just crashed every time. I don't know why. I never worked it out. As soon as the update came in, problem gone. I can delete 1,000 emails. It's all good.
Yeah. I mean, email is hard. We're talking about donations. Even 6 million, like, there are so many email providers out there, and our users, like, are using them. They're using them. And like, there is a standard. IMAP is a standard, but not everybody follows the standard right. And
Gmail.
So, and by not everybody, I mean like a lot of people. And like, so we're constantly finding issues with how folks are doing things. And there are 2 kind of ways to approach that, which we do both simultaneously. One, contact the provider, say, hey, you're doing this weird thing. Did you mean to do this? And they either say no, and we've had some really large providers say no and fix the problem on their end, or they say yes, at which point we have to just say, like, okay, well, what are we going to do to accommodate this weird way that somebody's doing this? And so, that bug could have been us, but there are so many layers of interaction that it's kind of difficult to say. But I guess the good thing is that, and we'll talk about this in a moment. In the past, we had this ESR. I mean, that is what we are on right now. Like, we do a yearly release, we do point updates, but those have to be, by their very nature, limited in what they do because you can't backport some things. And that has been a challenge because sometimes you have things that aren't quite working right, and you have to put a Band-Aid on it because you're like, we have the fix in the ESR, but because the problem is maybe too large in scope, we have to like figure out how we're going to solve it and then come back and do the big thing that solves it in the right way. But next year we're moving to a monthly release. People will still be able to get the ESR if they need that yearly cadence, but we're going to encourage most of our users to move to the monthly release because it allows us more freedom in how quickly we fix things and how we fix them, which will be really great for solving problems like yours, I would assume.
Yeah, I don't know what the problem was. It could have been any number of things. It was on Gmail. I don't know what the problem was. It doesn't happen now, so I don't even need to think about it anymore.
Yeah.
When did the UI rework like become an idea that started like getting floated around? And like, how long did that take to get done?
2018 was when we produced, the
Wait, so
sad
when the
thing is,
project was like barely dead, barely alive?
yeah.
Okay.
Well, I came on and I was going around as a community manager, which I also did social media and stuff, and I was just asking folks like, especially folks who came and used it, and then they said something in whatever channel to say like, I used it and I left, and I would reach out and I'd say, why? What were the problem areas? And a lot of folks said, like the user interface, it's cluttered, it's hard to navigate, it's overwhelming. And when they would describe what they were trying to do, I was like, yeah, I understand that.
Mm-hmm.
And so we were like, okay, we should at least come up with an idea of what this would look like to fix it. And so our UX architect at the time, now he's our head of product engineering, but at the time he was the UX architect, Alex. That's Alessandro Castellani. He came up with a really amazing. They're mock-ups, but they're more than mock-ups because they actually have, like, if you look at all of them, they have the complete flows and everything, so you can kind of play around as if you're using the application and see what that UX would be like. And what's hilarious, and I'm not accusing Microsoft of this, but what's hilarious is that got released, and then a year later, the new Outlook pictures got released, and they looked remarkably similar. So that was fun. We released that, but we just, as we went into figuring out what it takes to do that, we found out like there are a ton of architectural issues and technical debt that prevent us from making that change in any reasonable timeline. Mm-hmm. And that was depressing for me. That was like, you're thinking like, I'm going to come in, I'm going to help make a really big impact, and then having to take a step back and say, well, what if it takes me 3 years to make that impact versus a year? Mm-hmm. Am I ready to hang on that long and like try to get through that? Mm-hmm. And the answer turned out obviously to be yes, but it was tough to have to go through 20 years of code and essentially like audit, like what do we have to change in order to do this? And it was not trivial. Mike Conley is a principal engineer on Firefox, but he started at Mozilla on Thunderbird back when it was in, and he's amazing. He produces a video series called The Joy of Coding, where he teaches folks how to how to essentially develop, but using Firefox and using other projects in the Mozillaverse to show that. And he's just a lovely man. But he said, what you guys did was akin to moving an apartment building with people in it from the cliffside to a new location in town without everybody dying or something really bad happening. And that's what it felt like doing it. It's like, like we are changing these massive parts of the application that we rely on in many places. And if we screw up and we don't catch that screw up, really bad things could happen to people's email data, which is not ideal. Mm-hmm. And so but we did succeed, and we did finally ship at least the first iteration of the UX improvements that we had planned. And then next year, so June or July 2024, we'll see what I think are going to be it's never final, but what it should be,
Right.
where I will sit back and say, okay, I'm pretty happy with this.
Yeah, when I first saw it, I was like, wow, this, like, it felt familiar, but, like, what's a good way to put it? Like, familiar but polished, I guess is a good way to put it.
Yep, we said a Thunderbird user who's been using this for 20 years should look at this and feel comfortable, but it needs to have a UX. It needs to ultimately be a UX that is better and helps people be more effective at the tasks that they're trying to do. And if you're on the UX team at Thunderbird, you hear me say things like, I'm sure they get annoyed by it, but like contextual. Like in Thunderbird, it used to be that you had all the options everywhere. And so you right click on something, and it's still not great. We're going to, but like you right click on something and you had like this right click menu that was like, went on forever. And there were things in there that you really couldn't even do in that context, but maybe there was some way to do it with some settings on. And what we ultimately decided was like, well, we can look and see what is actually like relevant in this moment, make sure that those are there. And then if somebody has a more complicated use case, we can expose that, but like make sure that the things that people need when they need it is there for them, and not like an option out of 100, but an option out of like the actual most relevant things. And we have heat maps, so we don't collect any personal data whatsoever, but we do have interaction heat maps. So we see what points in the application, buttons, menu items, people are clicking on. And what that has allowed us to do, it was really funny because you talk about arguments on the internet. Like when we removed, I remember we moved a couple of options in the menu, and folks were like, why did you move that? That's like, everybody's using that. That's like a perfect place for it. And I remember being like, I'm so glad I have these heat maps. And I showed it to them, and it's like 20 million people over the course of a year clicked it like 3 times. And it's like that might just be you. Like, like like this is not a used area of the application. And so adding that cognitive load of putting options there that no one's going to use is just making life more difficult. And we as technical users think about things a little differently than most of our users who are, everybody thinks that most of our users are technical Linux users. That's not true at all, at all, in any way. Most of our users are Windows users, firstly, and when we go out and we try to randomly interview our users, a lot of them are just normal people. They're tax guy.
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah, I loaded up my stepdad's computer the other day. He's got a Mac, iMac from like 5 years ago. He's always run Firefox, always run Thunderbird. He doesn't know. He works on a farm. He's just like a mechanic on a farm.
Yep, and we have a lot of people like that. And when they encounter options that they don't understand, it burns time for them, because they're like, is that what I want? And like ultimately, if what we talked about earlier, if we're keeping something around for a small handful of users who use that feature in a way that it's not intended or something like that, well, that's not really a good reason to have that there. And if folks want to have that there, there's customization options
Hmm.
to have it behave that way. But we're not going to make it the default. But Supernova, really hard, but turned out really well and laid a fantastic groundwork for all of the remaining changes we need to make for, I feel like, us to, in earnest, actually compete with the applications like Outlook.
Hmm.
And I want to live in a world where folks don't use open source as a crutch, where they don't say, like, I use Thunderbird because it's open
Yeah.
source. That's a great reason to, that's a great thing. That's great for Thunderbird. It's great that it is open source. But I want people to say, I use Thunderbird because it's the best
Right.
tool for the job.
Like Blender, for
And
example. Like, people don't care
yeah,
that Blender's open source. Blender is incredible.
yep, exactly right. And I feel like I've had people try to convince me the other way and say, like, yeah, but it's open source, so like you don't, like, trying to convince me to not try to create the best product because of a disbelief that it can be.
Hmm.
And I don't buy into that at all. I think open source is the enabler for us to be the best product,
Hmm.
and we shouldn't be happy with being second best. Oh, but we're open source. Like, we should be like, no, because we have this, what I consider the right way to make software, we're able to build the best thing.
Yep. I think this goes back to what we were saying before, where when you're trying to, like, sell whatever term you want to use for, you're just trying to, like, get someone to use a program like Thunderbird. It's great that it's open source, but those other things, like having all your all your email accounts in one location, like, that's so much more important. The fact that it's open source to someone who doesn't write a line of code, like, in their entire life, they don't even know what source code is. Like, it doesn't matter that it's open source to them. The fact that it's free probably matters a lot more, but
Yeah.
the open source really only matters to the people that already care about open source. This is a
Yeah.
problem that I've brought up with, like, the FSF with their messaging. They're great at, like, shilling to free software people and
Yeah.
nobody else. Like, people who already
Yeah.
agree with you, they agree with you. You don't need to convince them.
Yeah. One problem we have in the open source community too is our developers, not all of them, not most of them, but some of them, and this is true in every community,
Mhm.
they just the and it holds back good open source software. They're making these arguments like, you know, this is this is like every user is like them.
Right.
And what I what I try to kind of help folks see is, like, in this mailing list for developers,
Hmm.
we're in a bubble right
Yeah, yeah.
now.
Just the fact that you're on a mailing list puts you in a
Yeah,
bubble.
exactly. Exactly. And it's like trying to say, like, I acknowledge the point you're making, but if you actually go and you talk to the normal Thunderbird user,
Mhm.
they're just, what you're pitching is just doesn't work for them.
Mhm.
And so, you know, I see this a lot in open source software where they're they want they say things like, we want to be more successful with your normal user, but then they build for the power user. And and what I think about that is that you should enable the power user to do what they want to do.
Mhm.
But if you really want to reach just normal folks, you know, build the defaults to those people
Yep.
and then enable the power users to, because they're going to learn how to do it. They're going to figure out how to do it.
Mhm.
They're going to figure out how to do the crazy stuff. you can make it easy for that to happen. But like for Thunderbird, we're too far down this road of we have 80% of 90% of normal, folks who aren't developers using the application. Like we need to build for them. And then by the way, like we are going to make sure that everything that we build has the ability for you to customize it to meet your special needs. So that's, yeah.
So you want to have a streamlined core feature set, and then for people who want to expand out from that, have those tools easily accessible, but not in a way that overwhelms someone who's just trying to do that like basic functionality.
Yeah. I mean, most people want to see their emails on Thunderbird, reply to those emails, and write new emails. That's what they want to do.
If you happen to use it for business, I guess also make new events. And that's pretty much that's probably it. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. And so for us, it's like, let's make those activities work really, really well. And then the other activities that folks tell me that they're doing, let's make sure that you can do them, but that's not going to be, a significant part of our time trying to figure out how you can do. I wish I had good examples. They're all very interesting, but very obscure,
Anything involving RSS already puts you into the weird category.
Yeah. Or, it's like, I'm not actually using a mail server. I'm connected to, the mail in actually like system folder in, my Linux install, and, it's like, I understand that you're using this tool for that purpose, but that's not the main use case that we're focused on. Like that is something where like we really are going to spend 99% of our time on these main use cases, and then we will help you if you want to help us make improvements to this use case. So yeah.
So what has been the reaction to the new UI? Because I personally really like it.
Yeah.
But obviously, considering like the old UI's been around for a while, there's gonna be a lot of nostalgia for like what it was. And I there are a couple of Reddit posts I've seen like, how do I revert back to the old look? Like, what happened to the old look? What has it been like a general positive reception to it? And yeah.
So there's a few indicators because we were really worried about that. There's a few indicators that we use. One is obviously, what do we see? What do people tell us? What do people write us? What do people post? It's challenging because most people who like it don't go out of their way to post on Reddit. And people will always, the change is hard, and we're not oblivious to that. In fact, we've talked a lot about that. Like we wanted to make it so that folks would have the same experience or a very, very similar experience, when they updated. So if you're, the card view is new, but there's still the list view, and we don't change that. If you're on list view, you're on list view when you update. And the other thing that I looked at really closely was, frankly, the pings, the daily active user pings. We don't see any information about the user, but we do get ping, like how many when you update or when you start it, the client asks for an update, things like that. Like, are these numbers changing? And the answer is not really at all. And so if the changes were very detrimental, no one really left. And in fact, it looks like we gained users. And so the thing is, like, I kind of like take everything with a grain of salt. I listen to the concerns about, the changes we made, but then I also like leverage that against, are we seeing any behavioral changes as a result? And if the answer is no, and I have to say, let's try to address these problems that people are raising, but on the whole, I don't think we've made a mistake here. And in fact, what I've heard a lot of folks say, so the changes were for our existing users, but they're also based on a lot of feedback from people who came and used it and left.
Mm-hmm.
And we didn't want to be an application that before this, we had this user number and it would go down slightly year over year, very, very slightly.
Mm-hmm.
But still going down.
Yeah.
And we were like, okay, we're not gaining new users. We're retaining users and just slightly losing them. But I made perhaps the morbid observation that maybe our users are dying. Like they're because it was so gradual.
Being an optimist.
Yeah, but it was so gradual that it was like, I'm sure it's a number of reasons. They get a new computer, they
sure.
install Thunderbird, things like that. And then we roll out this update, and like I said, one of the things you look at is like, what are people doing?
Mm-hmm.
Is activity going up? The answer appears to be yes.
Mm-hmm.
So okay, that's a good indicator across what data we do have. And then you ask people, you try to ask both your hardcore people and your normal folks as much as you can randomly to see what do you think. And on the whole, my conclusion and those who have done this data gathering with me have concluded that folks generally like the changes. With any change, there are things that you learn, or that whether it's on the user side they learn, and then they're like, okay, at first I didn't like it, but after a month I got my muscle memory changed and now I like it. Or they say this is still a problem, and we go back and we look and we say, okay, do they have a point? If the answer is yes, then we fix it. And you'll see with the new update this new year, you'll see fixes for things that we learned, okay, we know how we got there, but folks had issues with that, and so we changed it.
One thing I have noticed reading through some of the comments, none of these threads are super popular, but one thing I have noticed in a lot of these threads, and I'm sure you've probably seen people complain about this, things like readability because their theme is terrible. They don't realize that the theme is what is causing the problem, not the actual design itself. The theme will have a slightly mismatched colors, and it's setting an icon to be black when the background is also black, when it has nothing to do with the application itself.
Oh man. Yeah. Welcome to the world of difficult interactions where you're getting these bug reports and you're like, what is this person seeing?
Mm-hmm.
So you're like, you need to upload a screenshot, you need to see, and then you realize that it's something that you have limited control over. And then we try to address that by reaching out both to the, for instance, I know, because I've experienced this exact problem a few times.
Mm-hmm.
Reach out to the theme developer, say, hey, Ryan here, we got some reports that your theme looks messed up on the new version. Do you want to update it? We can provide some feedback. And then also going to user and being like, yeah, cool theme, but you may want to change to a different theme to have a better experience. And that's difficult. And Thunderbird is so old and has so many add-ons and stuff like that you find that there's a lot of cases where you're just like, well, it says in our support stuff, go into safe mode, which is the version that loads without custom add-ons. Okay, is it still broken? All right, but that's just a part of the game, and making big changes. And we talked about, big changes come with consequences, and you don't test against a 15-year-old theme.
Yeah.
In your testing, maybe you do, but and we do have a lot of testers in the community who have interesting setups, but stuff slips through where you're like, we just didn't, that wasn't even remotely on our radar.
Right, right. Yeah, you can't really do anything about a theme that just hasn't been updated. Like that's it, you can design the UI in a way that it makes sense for the major themes. Like,
Yeah.
that's understandable, but like there's so much out there, and then there's users making their own themes. Like you can't address every single use case. You've just got to like make it clear, like if you are reporting a problem, like what is a problem with us and what is a problem with someone else. And I guess that's sort of why there is that whole like don't theme my apps thing that was coming from some GNOME developers. Like I understand that from the developer side, like you don't want to deal with this, like this is not our problem. But
the UX and UI team, are honestly all but one are Linux users.
Mm-hmm.
But if you ask them, like, what is the most annoying thing? It's like random Linux user who's using a really, really crazy theme.
Mm-hmm.
And like the amount of time spent for a very small amount of users trying to contact the people who can help fix that problem is like just unfortunate. But it's a price you pay for being a really versatile, customizable app, and we're willing to pay that price. And what I would ask anybody, who's posting on Reddit is just like, we didn't try to break you, but we will try to fix you if you help us understand what it is you're seeing and what your setup is. We do in earnest try to fix folks, but I do feel for the folks who say don't theme my app, because I feel that way a lot of days where I'm like, well, you're using this theme that I've never heard of, and I'm trying to understand like who I need to contact to try to fix this, and just bear with us.
Yeah,
because we'll try to help you, but we can't count for everything. But on the whole, I'm really happy with Supernova, and I know the team is, and I know, I think that, overall folks will, once they get used to it, even the folks who are posting in these threads and stuff, and they have concerns, I think we're dealing with 20 years of muscle memory and just habits and stuff. Once they see that once they get used to it, I feel like they'll be like, okay, yeah, this does make me faster, more capable of managing my email. And frankly, the stuff we changed was technology that was, a lot of it was old and it's not used anywhere anymore. And it was breaking. And a lot of the bugs people wanted us to fix, we just couldn't fix, because it's like, that will require ripping all of this out. And, I remember one person in particular telling me they hated the changes, but then when I talked to them about the bugs that they had reported and, were constantly bringing up, I was like, this is what had to happen to fix those bugs. Like there's before the stack that we were using was the cause of these bugs. So, it is what it is.
Pretty much. One thing we haven't really touched on, we like briefly mentioned it, the mobile version of Thunderbird. How did the whole stuff with K9 Mail come about? Like, what's the deal there?
I was going to FOSDEM, and I wanted to talk to Keddy, who maintained K9 Mail, because I thought, well, at the very least, K9 Mail looks like what I think Thunderbird on Android would be. And so I said, at first I started talking to him thinking, we'll become sister projects, not in the same organization or anything, but just we'll push users there who
Mhm.
want to use something on mobile,
Right.
and they can say, if you want to use something on desktop, go here. But as I started talking to Ketty, and it comes back to this sustainability thing,
Mm.
he was like, I shouldn't say anything he wouldn't say, but he was like, essentially, this was a project, a passion for him,
Mhm.
and not something that paid the bills.
Right.
And, he was looking at, um, I'm not going to do this justice because he would explain it better, but he was kind of looking at like, what am I going to do, in order to actually pay the bills, and then like, what's going to happen to K9 as a result.
Mhm.
And I'm sure he would have continued maintaining it, but it just maybe wouldn't have been as much of a focus as it had been.
Right.
And I thought, what a shame. Like, we could try to help this project become more sustainable.
Mhm.
And we started talking about that. But then eventually I was like, why work in these silos when frankly we could just combine forces
Mhm.
and try to bring these two products in line with each other,
Mhm.
and these two communities which are focused on all these same problems, like you have to solve the same problems in both spaces.
Mhm.
So at least coming together and working on these problems in both projects at the same time made a lot of sense. And just as we talked, it became clear that we should come together and work together. Um, and I'm glad that I was really worried about our community's reaction to me coming to them and saying, maybe we should adopt K9.
Mhm.
But ultimately, when we sat down and we really talked it through, everyone agreed, like, yeah, this makes sense. And a lot more sense than us trying to build something from scratch
Mhm.
on the platform.
Right. Because you're
Uh,
saying that it's basically what you wanted to do anyway, so you'd just be like duplicating effort for the most part.
Yeah, and 90, what is it? I have the stats somewhere.
Mhm.
98% or 99% of email users, it's some insanely high stat,
Mhm.
use email on their phone.
But yeah,
Um,
there's a lot of people who just don't really use computers. Like,
yep.
especially if you're like growing up now and your first computing device is a phone. Like a lot of people, it's gonna get worse. Like, there's gonna be more people who just don't use computers. It's going to just be
Yep.
phones.
Yeah. And in the Delta, I wish I had the stat here. I didn't, that's one thing I didn't
Mhm.
bring with me to this conversation. But the Delta is there's a lot less people who check their email on their desktop than check it on their phone.
Right. Right.
And so I also thought like if we don't if we're not doing something in the mobile space, I think we'll kind of fade into obscurity. Um, and I was just worried about that. And frankly, phones are like you said, they're the computing device that's most used.
Mhm.
And so if we're gonna create software that has our values that touches the most people, we need to be there.
Mhm.
And K9 was so closely aligned with what our values were and what we believed in as far as all these things, customization, freedom,
Mhm.
et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, that we were like, if we bring our expertise and our talent and our developers to this project, we can rapidly improve
Mhm.
K9, and that turned out to be true. And if you watch the K9 development pace, it's really picked up this past,
Mhm.
what is it, year and change.
I'm sort of the opposite. I cannot stand checking email on my phone. I don't want it. My phone exists as like a YouTube box basically, and
Yeah,
occasionally I will use like Facebook Messenger because that's what my family uses. But I get the fact that people want to do that. Like it's not for me. Maybe I'll give it a try. I just don't really tend to find that to be a I don't like typing on my phone. Like that's the main thing for me. So if I'm gonna look at emails, I'm probably gonna be replying to emails, and I don't really want to reply on my phone. So it's not what I'm
yeah,
gonna do.
yeah, yeah. Makes total sense.
It's
Makes total sense.
I was looking at the Play Store score for K9, and it seems like there's always like I don't know how much weight you put on Play Store reviews because it seems like whenever anything changes, like it just gets like slammed with a bunch of
Well,
one
you also
stars.
have to look, the changes they're complaining about were from before,
Mm.
K9 was a part of us. And the the thing is, K9 has been around for a very, very long time
Mm.
as well. It was a fork of the original Android email client, not the Google like Android email
Oh,
client.
okay.
And and so we're talking about reviews for, you know, forever. I
Mm.
mean, like for a long time. You can go and look. I can't think of what the earliest one is off the top of my head, but I bet it's like probably more than 10 years old
Mm.
easily. And so you're talking about so many versions of the application that the score exists against. And honestly, what we're going to do is we're going to keep that Play Store listing open
Mm.
and deliver updates to it.
Mm.
But we're renaming K9 Thunderbird on Android, and we're creating a new, because we don't think, first off, we don't think that reflects it, and secondly, there's just a lot of um, I guess what we've done over this past year and what we'll continue to do till Thunderbird on Android's release is we've just really defined like what makes um, an app Thunderbird on Android,
Mm.
and that is going to be a different set of things than what has made K9 K9.
Right, right.
Um, I think it will be improvements, and I think that folks will appreciate that, K9 users, but it is a different set of things, and so uh, folks can try out what's happening, today with K9, and you can even opt into the beta on the
Mm.
Play Store. But you'll see, throughout the first half of 2024, some pretty big changes, and then Thunderbird for Android as a result of that.
And I'm sure the sort of UX design principles that go into working on a mobile device are very, very different from what you would do on desktop.
There are some similarities, but there are some key differences, and um, fortunately, people get that. I was kind of worried that our folks who came from the Thunderbird community start commenting on the Android stuff
Mm-hmm.
might not always get that, but everybody got it and everybody understands. Like, you're dealing with limited screen space, you're dealing with a totally different set of just everything,
Mm-hmm.
and so like whether it's interaction or connection, things like that. So there's just a lot of different uh, considerations that go into how you build a
Mm-hmm.
mobile client.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we've done a really good job. And I have to just say, like, the canine community too is just an awesome community. And I expected some pushback when Ketty shared like that this is what he wanted to do. He thought was best for the project to join Thunderbird. I didn't get I don't remember getting any negative feedback. That might not be true, but it,
I'm
I
sure I
don't
could find
remember
some if
it
I
that way.
dig far enough.
I'm sure you can too, but like as far as like people who are active in the community, they just were like, yeah, like let's do it.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's awesome to hear. Like, it's great to hear that people are just like, you know what? Let's just see what happens. Like, obviously people might be a bit worried, like, okay, what's gonna change here? But before anything's really like been done, it's weird to just like instantly have a negative reaction to it. Like, Thunderbird's been around for a long time. It's clearly been like a successful email client, and especially now with the whole like massive increase in funding, like Thunderbird has clearly shown that they know what they're doing. So let's just see what happens with K9. It could go badly. If it does, well, something new could be tried. But
Yeah.
there's no point just, ditching the idea just it's not like, Microsoft comes along with like, we're gonna work on K9 now. Like it's not that. It's someone. It's a proven open client. Let's just see how it goes.
Yeah. That's exactly what we got, and I'm really grateful that is what we got. And like I said, from the other side too, Thunderbird folks were like, we should tell a story on mobile. Let's do it.
Mm-hmm. Well, hopefully that
But
ends up. Oh, go on.
no,
I was gonna say, hopefully that ends up going well in the long run. Because right now it's only been a year or so, not even that.
Yeah. Well, it's been I think it's, I can always get these things wrong when I don't have them in front of me, but I think it's just been a little over a year,
Mm-hmm.
and it's been going very, very well.
The blog post came out in June, but I don't know if there was things happening before the blog post where it was announced.
Maybe it has been less. It's feels like it's been a while.
I'm sure there would be discussions happening before like it was publicly announced. So it might have been a year with that.
Like I said, this came out of conversations over, I think, 2 or 3 years at FOSS.
Mm-hmm.
And so, it's just like we just picked it up every time we got together and talked it through. So for me, it's like goes way back.
Mm-hmm. Right.
But yeah, jumping out of Android, and unfortunately, I'm running out of time. So
that's all good. I want to wrap this up soon anyway.
Yeah, but we also want to do something in iOS, and we have a ton of users who use iOS, and unlike with K9, we haven't been able to identify an open source email client in that's maintained and that's in good shape, and frankly, it's very hard to even just find any, period. But so we're going to have to build something new there. But I think that'll be a really cool opportunity for folks to get involved who are using iOS devices and are like, hey, I'd love to have my say kind of shape the future of what is going to be built here.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that'll be a lot of fun to just build something, I would say, from scratch. I don't really want to use the word from scratch because I know there are good open source libraries that we can leverage to take care of some of the stuff we have to do in the iOS world. But yeah, it'll be great to build something from scratch and to be able to think from the very beginning, like versus K9 and Thunderbird, which are existing. Like if we were just starting fresh, which we are, how would we do this? How would we architect this? How would we build it? So that'll be a lot of fun. I think we'll start that work. I mean, I know we'll start that work at the beginning of 2024. The question is, how long does that work take to actually get into the hands of users?
Yeah.
And unless they're downloading it and using it, whatever the alpha, is like, because it will be open source, but like, I don't know. It'll probably be, I would guess it would be 2025 when we actually get normal people using it.
Mm-hmm. Well, hopefully that goes well. And since you need to head out, let's wrap it up here unless there's anything quick you want to mention.
I will mention that, there are a couple things coming down the pipe that I guess is a good way to close it, that I think folks will find interesting. When we were looking at Outlook and we were looking at the other folks in this space and kind of like trying to figure out how we fit or stacked up against them. Mm-hmm. One thing I didn't love is, Outlook and Gmail, which is a different story, but they have these really slick features around whether it's setting appointments with folks in an automated way or doing things, these complicated kind of cloud things that are really useful, but if you're just Thunderbird running on somebody's machine, are hard to pull off in a way that's actually good.
Right.
And so we've invested a little bit of our time and money into trying to build open source tooling around that stuff that we're going to run in the cloud as a service. that will allow people to do this, but also folks can run on their own if they're interested in having their in having that be under their control. Fortunately, they're all built around privacy respecting, like whether it's end-to-end encryption or these other ways in which we make sure that their personal data isn't just like sitting in our hands. And so, that's so hopefully folks will feel comfortable using the servers we spin up that do these things. But if they don't, they can run it, and that's all fine. But that's something that I expect to also roll out in 2024, at least some initial services to see, do people love this? Do they hate it? And then that will inform what we do going forward. But the conclusion we came to is the only way to be able to actually offer a competitive experience, we're going to have to do some things not on device. And it'll be completely optional. People don't have to use any of these features. But if they want to leverage, what can be done off their computer, they'll have the option to do that. And then, so that's my tease for you and your audience. But and I will share, and I'll share it with you when it's time, an early access sign up form that folks can go and sign up and get pulled into, I guess, a closed beta.
That sounds really cool.
It is. I don't want to tell any more yet until we are closer to open sourcing everything, because I feel bad like saying like this is what we're working on, but you can't look at it today. The reason being is we know when we open source it, everybody and their mom is going to have an opinion, so we want to make sure it's good before we do that. At least good enough. And then the last thing that I'll say is, right now we have this big campaign at the end of the year fundraising around, we're trying to reach a certain goal to make it so that we have all of the resources we need to do Android and iOS to like the level we want to do it at. And it's like we're so close to that goal. And so what I would encourage your folks to do in your audience, based on your YouTube views, if everybody who was in your audience went and gave $5, we would crush our goal for this year. And what that means is more developers working on the mobile clients, and we're not in a position where we have to say like, okay, well, this is just going to have to take longer because, we just don't have the people to move as fast as we want to. So that's my closing thing, is if you love Thunderbird, or if you're interested in the direction we're going, or you aren't happy with your mobile clients, like, please consider going over and donating to Thunderbird, because we're going to be so close to having exactly the amount we need for next year in order to do all the things that we hope to do. And it doesn't mean we're not going to do them, but if we hit that goal, then we don't have to make compromises. So that's my closing thing, is like, if folks like what we're doing or are interested in it, please go and donate and help us have another great year so we can do all the things and free the inbox.
Where can they go to donate? What do they need to go to?
Just go to thunderbird.net. There's a donate button right at the top. Hit that. And like I said, literally $5. If folks give $5, it will go a long, long way. Or, our average is $17, which is great. That's a pizza. If you're willing to cook for yourself tonight and give, what you would spend on a pizza, takeout, or whatever, you can help us get so much closer to this goal. And we might hit that goal anyway, but I would love to just, at the end of the year, be able to say, yes, thank you, everybody. We did it. We're going to be able to do the things that we had decided are important. And, we've got the resources to do.
Mm-hmm. Well, when some of this fun stuff starts coming out, I would definitely have to do this again and chat about it. It sounds like you got some cool things in store, and hopefully they all come together.
Yeah.
So, go on.
I was just gonna say this is the side note or maybe the extra footnotes. We as a community and we as a folks working on Thunderbird also, more cool stuff is going to come, because when we learn and we grow and we learn how to do new things, we learn about other new cool things that we can also do.
Yep.
And so it's this flywheel that just keeps going and going.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, if there's anywhere else you want to direct people to, let them know, and then we can do my sign off.
Yeah, I just want folks to go to thunderbird.net, download Thunderbird if you're not using it today, donate if you are, and download K9 if you want to see where we're going with the mobile app.
Awesome.
That's it.
Okay, so as for me, if you want to go watch my gaming stuff, I stream on Broodon Games twice a week. Right now I'm playing through probably Neptunia Sisters vs. Sisters and Neo The World Ends With You, so have fun with that one. Lots of anime garbage. If you want to see my Linux videos, might talk about Thunderbird there. I don't know. We'll see what comes up. That is Brody Robertson. I do Linux videos there 6 days a week. And if you're listening to the audio version of this, you can find the video version on YouTube at Tech Over Tea. If you're watching the video version, you'll find the audio on any podcast platform. There is an RSS feed. You could put the RSS feed in Thunderbird if you want to. I don't do that, but the option is there.
Yeah.
So
it's very possible.
Give people the final word. How do you want to sign off?
Yeah. Ryan, check me out on Mastodon. Ryan and Mastodon does. Ryan Lee Sipes at Mastodon.social. Sorry. It's starting to get late here.
Okay.
And then Thunderbird and Mastodon.online. Awesome. And that's the best place to follow us.
Catch you guys later.
See you.